All right, I'd like to wrap up our work on typography with 7 rules for great typography. First rule, 2 typefaces maximum, no more. That means no more than 2 font families. Character widths and the weights of each font should be complementary to the other, and I'm going to show you an example what I mean by that. Avenir and Georgia fonts, for example, have similar character widths, and that is what creates visual harmony. So here's Avenir Book, and here's Georgia. What I want you to notice here is that the character widths are basically the same. Okay, the distance between letters, the kerning, is relatively similar. You can see what the parallels are here. That kind of visual harmony, even though they are 2 different fonts, is what allows them to work together as a pairing. And of course, it also creates some visual interest. At the same time, these font pairings need to have some visual differences. Otherwise, there's really no reason to use a second font at all. If these were both serif fonts, or if they were both sans serif fonts, for instance, there really wouldn't be much reason to use them both because they'd be very similar. So what you're trying to do is create some visual difference, some interest, but at the same time, there has to be some visual harmony in order for them to work together. So here's some examples of what to do and what not to do in terms of font pairings. If you take a look at the mobile version of the WBAL news app, which happens to be a news station here in Baltimore, here's what you're going to see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different styles of fonts here, okay? Instead of 2, they've got 6. What happens is the whole thing feels disjointed. There's no sense of unity or harmony or any of the principles that we've discussed so far. It's all very disparate. It's all different. Nothing holds together as a group of contextually related information. Here's another example, the Momtastic website. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different styles of typography. And again, as a result, when you look at this, nothing really holds together. There's no clear signal that says, this is the headline of this article, this is the subhead, this interactive element belongs here, this text goes with the article. It all starts to feel like unrelated information. So this does not work. Now let's take a look at 2 good examples. This is a Regal Cinemas theater app, and what you'll see here is that there are 2 typefaces. Okay, 2 styles repeated in different sizes, very clear visual hierarchy, and you can see that there's a relationship. Okay, it feels a lot cleaner. If they had used 6 fonts here, the overall effect would be like looking at 40 pieces of disparate information. Instead, it's very clear, it's well ordered, the hierarchy and organization and how things are related to each other is very clear. Here's another example, a news app. Same deal. We get 1 typeface used for the headlines and another used for all supplementary information. Consistent, simple, not a whole lot to think about, and that's why it works. Rule number 2, limit line width. When line lengths are too wide, the eye has to work a lot harder to track the text, meaning that following and finding the beginning of the next line becomes difficult. That makes reading and comprehension a lot more difficult and a lot slower. The common standard in general is about 60 characters per line, but for mobile devices, it's less. It's about 30 to 40 characters per line. Now in this example, these are 2 different mobile screenshots. On the left, you've got a character count of about somewhere between 50 and 75 characters. You can see how small that is. Imagine this on your phone. It's going to be pretty tough to read. By comparison, if you look at the Washington Post, we have between 30 and 40 characters, a lot simpler, a lot bigger, and much easier to read and comprehend. Here's a web page from a government website. Take a look at this, 131 characters. Way, way, way too dense. It is very difficult to read anything this wide, quickly, easily, efficiently, accurately. Quite frankly, what happens is a lot of times as you read from left to right, the brain will actually forget some of what it reads, and people will find themselves reading the same sentence over and over and over and over again, feeling like they didn't comprehend it. If that's ever happened to you, this is one of the reasons why that occurs. Compare that to these mobile screenshots, where in the case on the left, we have 29 characters from left to right, really big, really simple. And on the right here, we have 40 characters from left to right. Again, these are both really, really easy to read. So both approaches work. Rule number 3, choose readability over all else. Text will be used at various sizes in your interface, from headlines to body text to form labels to buttons to data to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You get the idea. As such, the typefaces you choose have to be readable at all those sizes, which means you should absolutely be religious about testing your interface in its infancy, in the early stages. Not to mention the fact that users will view your design on different devices with different screen sizes and different resolutions. All right, so you've got to test as early as possible your assumptions about what sizes and fonts and line widths that you're going to use. Your typefaces should have enough weight that the letter forms don't degrade at small sizes. They start to fall apart, they start to look pixelated. So for example, if you look at this selection of different sizes and weights, you can see that as it goes down, it gets a little tougher to look at. This is the kind of thing you want to do very quickly when you're thinking about fonts, all right? Set a paragraph, do a quick version, and just look at the image on your phone. You don't even have to code a page. You don't have to build anything. Just take a screenshot of your layout, look at it full screen on your phone in your Photos app. You'll get a very quick sense of whether or not your sizing and weight is appropriate. Here's an example. This is the Drudge Report, which we saw earlier. This is what it looks like on a laptop device. Now that's bad enough, okay? It's bad enough that this text is so small and it's underlined and it's really a poor choice. On mobile, it's infinitely worse. Of course, they didn't really work very hard to implement a mobile version of this, but you can see how bad that is. Okay, there's no way anyone can read this. No way anyone is going to read this on a small screen. Not going to happen. Here's an example from the Android website. Here's what it looks like on a laptop screen, and here's what it looks like on a mobile screen. In both cases, this is pretty good. Now, I will say that on the mobile version, I would like that to be a little bit larger, but I'm splitting hairs. Overall, that works. It's clean, it's readable, and it's working. Rule number 4, choose legibility. Make sure every letter form that you use, every font that you choose is clearly distinguishable in your typeface. And here's what I mean by that. Beware of L's that look like I's, for example. In the word illustration, take a look at the first 3 characters. Those are practically the same letter. The only difference is that the L's are slightly higher. That still presents an obstacle to clear, easy, quick comprehension. Some fonts also have poorly specified kerning, which I mentioned earlier, which can make an R next to an N look like an M, such as this example in Burnish. Okay, that's B-U-R-N-I-S-H. However, the R and the N are so tight that it looks like an M. Bummish. Definitely not what was intended here. Or an F and an L can look like an H in flickering. Okay, perfect example. See that? That's just poor specification in kerning in the font itself. And if you don't have a good way to adjust that, and in code you basically don't, it's a bad choice. Okay, so you want to avoid things like this that create misunderstanding or misreading. And I've said it before, but it bears repeating. Most free fonts, aside from Google Fonts, have horrible kerning. So if you're downloading free fonts to use, be wary. Here's an example from Bob Dylan's website. Typography here is excellent. They've done a really good job creating hierarchy between the headlines, between details like that date there, and the body copy. While this all works together very well because it's the same typeface for the most part, they also do an excellent job differentiating between navigation, between headlines, between the links at the top that you see that Bob Dylan newsletter button, and then you see search and lyrics. Different font, set aside, those are anomalies. They are different from everything else and they're treated differently from everything else. Really well done. And again, this is infinitely readable. And if you look at this on a mobile device, it's even more so. It's just very clear, very crisp, and at the same time, it has a lot of character. Rule number 5, use space between paragraphs. Said it before, saying it again, it's that important. Visual breaks between paragraphs give the eye a place to rest. And that rest actually speeds up understanding and comprehension. There was a widely cited study a while back that found a good use of white space between paragraphs, and particularly in the left and right margins as well, increases comprehension by almost 20%. Generously spaced content is easier to focus on and easier to process. So increasing the space between lines of text makes those lines easier and faster to read. Your leading should be at least equal to half the character height. Okay, if you look at the lines between these spaces on the right, you'll see that that height is about half the height of the characters in the font. All right, so that's kind of how you judge it. Use that as your barometer. Here's an example from the Butler Snow commercial litigation section of their website. Look at this. It's a big curtain of text. It's a big blob of stuff, and it is very difficult to sort of chunk it out and read it quickly. That's because it all runs together. There are no rests. There are no stops. Okay? Doesn't work. By contrast, if you look at this article on Medium, you'll see that there are clear segments of information, clear chunks. Here's the headline, here's the subhead, and here's how the paragraphs work. All those spaces work together to actually make it really quick to read and comprehend and move through this very quickly. Rule number 6, align text elements in the layout using their baselines. When you have multiple text elements on a single screen, they should all share points of common alignment. Even if those chunks are unrelated, keeps the layout ordered, makes it easy and very quick to scan. On this slide, for example, the baseline on the text on the right from the last slide is aligned with this baseline. You see those points of alignment? Even though they're two different things, even though I'm using one as an example, when I construct my slides, I am very careful to try, whenever possible, to align the baselines of text. That order, just like the alignment principle I showed you before, that principle in typography works the same way. It helps us get a clearer, quicker mental picture of what's organized and where, and allows us to bounce around and move through things much faster. Those relationships are really important, even if they're subconscious. Rule number 7 is to use styles to visually differentiate content. When you're choosing a typeface, you want one that has at least 3 styles: regular, italic, and bold. You use those styles in your design to differentiate between types of content. And so far, I've showed you lots of examples where that happens, the most common being headline, subhead, and body copy. Sometimes this can remove the need for more than one font entirely. All right, you may just choose one typeface, one font. Every level of information can be signified with styling. And here's how that works. Let's say you're working with Droid Serif, which is this font, and you say, okay, headline is going to be big and bold like this. I'm a headline hinting at what's to come. You use the same font for the subhead, but instead of bold, it's italic. Okay, I'm a subhead giving you additional clues as to what you're about to read. Finally, we get to the body copy. It's the same font, but it's regular. We use italicization on one word, might in this case, just to call it out as an accent. Okay, but you see how those 3 things certainly work together because it's the same font family. At the same time, they each stand out in a very distinct manner because of the way they're treated. If I could encourage you to do one thing and one thing only with typography, this would be it. Use these 3 styles, bold, italic, regular, to differentiate content types, to further strengthen those chunks of related contextual information. Otherwise, you get sort of a big curtain of similar looking stuff that people can't really differentiate between and won't bother to slog their way through. Take a look at how styles are used here. Let's start at the top left. Where you see top articles, that's a style that signifies category. Underneath it, here's a style that signifies item. On the right in the article, we've got a style for our headline, we've got a style for the article credit, who wrote it, and we've got a style for body. All right, what they do within the body of the article is they use another subhead style to break up the content, okay, to call it out and say, here's what this little mini section is about. Now, could they do that using the same size and just making it bold? Sure, but that slight size difference is enough to call attention to itself and say, this is a new topic. What this does when repeated throughout an article is it allows people to sort of quickly scan, get an understanding of what it is they're about to read, and make a quick decision as to whether or not they want to invest their time reading it. This is the power of styles.